Welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting for April 7, 2015, and I'll start by saying thank you to the voters of Medfield for re-electing me. And then we want to turn next to the reorganization of our board, and I'll entertain a motion to elect and, not elect, but, yeah, I guess we elected.
Move us
chair.
around, I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll make a motion that Mr. DeSorga will become the new chairman of the board.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Yep. And I'll move that Mark Fisher be the clerk of the board for the next year.
I'll second that.
You're the chair now, you have to go away. All in favor? Yep.
Aye.
I actually have my gavel. The last time I was chairman back in 1981, 1982. So I held on to that. We have a motion then for Mark Fisher to act as clerk.
So moved.
Second that. All in favor?
Yep.
Aye. And we have a motion for Mr. Peterson to be third member.
I'll second that.
All in favor? I want to make kind of a pledge that anyone that comes on for an appointment, we're going to stick to the time. If somebody's on at 8 o'clock, we're going to have you on at 8 o'clock so that you're not waiting longer than the time that you're supposed to. Also, just a couple of things on the agenda. What I would like to do is go a little bit more of a traditional Robert's rules so that when we begin, we'll actually vote to approve the minutes of the last meeting. And then we'll go to old business, new business, and the appointments when the time so dictates. So why don't we start, as we do usually, by taking a moment, first of all, to remind everyone that this is being recorded. And second, we want to take a moment of appreciation and remembrance of our brave servicemen and women that are serving around the world, particularly those from the town of Medfield. Okay, thank you. We have two appointments tonight, one at 7 o'clock, and that's the Community Preservation Act, and one at 8 o'clock, and that's the Economic Development Committee. I see that we have the permanent building committee here. We'll try to get to you guys as soon as we possibly can before we do any other business. So, Community Preservation Act.
Yes.
Can you introduce yourself? And first of all, thank you so much for coming out. Sure, that podium would be great.
Yes, my name is Katherine Roth, Kathy Roth from the Community Preservation Coalition, and I'm pleased to be here tonight, Mr. New Chairman and members of the board and members of the public and municipal officials here in Medfield. I have brought a presentation to introduce you to the Community Preservation Act, and so if you will look over on the wall there. I first wanted to introduce you, for those of you who aren't aware of our organization, to our organization. We're a nonprofit organization, the Community Preservation Coalition. And we're composed of a number of other nonprofit organizations that work in the three major areas of the Community Preservation Act. So historic preservation, open space preservation, and affordable housing. And we also have representatives from communities that are working with the CPA program. Since 2007, we threw open our organization to municipalities that wanted to join our coalition. And so we operate now kind of on the same model as, say, the Mass Municipal Association or the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissions, where we offer services to communities and they help support our work with membership dues. It's completely optional to join the coalition. So that's our organization. And then we offer the services that we offer, just to, again, introduce you to our work. Website technical assistance. We have a newsletter that goes out to our communities working with the Community Preservation Act program, conferences, and assistance with education about the CPA program, such as this presentation this evening. So that's what we do. We also do a lot of work in advocating for the program up at the State House. And in fact, I was up there this morning. We had a big legislative briefing on some CPA legislation that we're promoting. So that's a big part of our work. So again, just to introduce you to the program, what is the Community Preservation Act? It's actually state enabling legislation that was passed in the year 2000. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, that's Governor Paul Cellucci signing the CPA into a law. Next to him is, I guess at that time, Lieutenant Governor Jane Swift, who then later did become governor as well, acting governor. So it is a state law, but because it's enabling legislation, that means that the law is not operational in communities unless they vote to adopt it. So if Medfield were to have CPA operational, it would have to go to the ballot, local ballot, and adopt it to have it be operational here. So what is CPA? It enables enabling legislation, enables communities to establish a local dedicated fund for three main purposes: historic preservation, open space and recreation, and community housing. And so it's a fund, as I said, dedicated to those purposes. The monies raised by the program cannot be used for other municipal purposes, but are dedicated to those uses. So that is what the program is all about. In terms of where we are with the program, it's now 2015, 15 years on. We now have 158 communities, or 45% of the state's communities that have adopted CPA. So these communities have all had an election and have voted to have the program be operational. The next slide will, excuse me. The next slide shows kind of more recent electoral activity. This was from last November. We had a number of communities. The communities indicated in yellow there had CPA on the ballot, and the ones in red are communities that were taking it to ballot as to whether to raise their CPA surcharge, to expand their CPA program by raising their CPA surcharge. And I'll explain more about that later on. Of the 8 communities that voted on whether or not to have CPA operational in their communities, we did have 3 that did adopt it, the communities of Arlington, New Bedford, and Boxborough. So we have seen the adoption rates falling off a little bit, and we're not quite sure why. Actually, in 2013, we didn't have any communities adopting CPA. It could be that many of the communities that were going to adopt the program, for which it made sense, have already adopted it. It could be because the state match that communities get when they participate in the program has been dropping. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. We're not sure why, but we have seen adoption rates falling off somewhat. As you drive around the state, again, kind of 15 years into the program, you may see signs like this in different communities. Communities are often very, very proud of the projects that they fund with these local funds, and they often will put up a sign so that local taxpayers can know how their local CPA funds are being used. So again, as you drive around the state, you may see signs like this saying CPA funds at work, our community's funds at work on these projects. And again, they're often very compelling projects for the community that the community is very supportive of. So you'll see those. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the types of projects that could be funded with the Community Preservation Act. The Act is very broad. There are those 3 programmatic areas, but when it comes down to it, that can cover a lot of different projects that you may not even really think might be coverable by this program. So this slide just really shows the breadth of the program, from rehabilitating a town hall in the upper left-hand corner, that's in the town of Needham, gilding the dome there on their town hall, to the middle picture is of a lighthouse in Aquina on Martha's Vineyard. Actually, they're just about to embark on a CPA-funded project there to move that lighthouse back from the cliff, because with the erosion, the cliff is literally being eaten away, and so if they don't move that lighthouse, it's going to fall into the sea. So they're using their CPA funds for that. On the upper right-hand corner is some affordable housing built in the town of Amherst. Going clockwise around the lower right-hand corner with the hard hats, that's in the town of Chelmsford. where they're using their CPA funds to rehabilitate a historic municipal town hall building. And then the center bottom picture is of some farmland preserved in the town of Williamstown. And the left-hand picture on the bottom is a picture of an actual copy of the Declaration of Independence owned by the town of Mendon. And that community used their CPA funds to actually preserve that document. So again, a very wide range of types of projects locally that can be funded with CPA funds. Just a few numbers, again, kind of 15 years into the program. This is as of the end of last summer. You can see some numbers statewide, but kind of one of the more interesting numbers is that number on the bottom. $1.4 billion has been raised in 15 years from by communities and then matched with state funds for this program. So when you think of all those projects funded around the state with these funds, it's really allowed for a lot of projects in these various areas. So again, going back to some of the basics of the program, when a community votes to adopt CPA, what they're voting to do is to implement a local surcharge on their local property taxes of up to 3%. So it can be anywhere up to 3%. Now that surcharge is actually a surcharge on local property tax bills. So it doesn't affect your tax rate, and I'll show you the calculation later on, how you would calculate how much you owe. But it's figured out on your property tax bill after your bill has been calculated. When you do adopt CPA and implement this surcharge, you're then eligible to receive an annual check from the statewide Community Preservation Trust Fund. And that's a fund that provides matching funds to communities that work with this program. Again, the community decides what level of surcharge to adopt up to that 3% level. And there's also a number of exemptions that the community can implement when it adopts CPA. This shows the different available exemptions that a community can choose to implement when they adopt CPA. The first $100,000 of residential property value can be exempted from that calculation of this, how much a homeowner owes each year. That's probably one of the most popular exemptions that we see being adopted by communities. And then the second most popular exemption is the third one down, to exempt low-income homeowners and low and moderate income senior homeowners. And again, that's to protect people from with fixed incomes, or people that would have a difficult time perhaps paying the surcharge. So again, those are some possible exemptions that can be adopted when the program is passed locally. When a community adopts CPA, it is required to establish, by passing a town bylaw, to establish a local community preservation committee. And that's a committee similar to your conservation commission or your planning board. It's a local board or committee that will administer the program locally. And there are 5 required members on any community preservation committee, one each representing the 5 boards that you see there, listed there. And then the community can add up to 4 additional members as it chooses. So for a total of 9 possible members. And again, that would be done by passing a bylaw locally. And the bylaw would say how many additional members of those 4 it wants to have. Most communities do have a full 9-member committee. We do see some 7-member committees as well. But also how those additional members get on the board would be determined in that bylaw. Some communities actually have those as elected positions, and sometimes they're appointed by town moderator or board of selectmen, or again, it's up to the community to decide how those extra members would get on the board. The role of the committee, as I said, is to implement the program locally, and these are its responsibilities. It has to assess the town's community preservation needs and develop a plan. It also has a responsibility of printing up a project proposal or project application forms, excuse me, and circulating those for members of the public or different departments within the community to fill out. And then those would be submitted to that board. And then the board would review those project proposals and get input from the public and town boards and committees. They are required to hold one public hearing annually to get input from the community, but they also can hold additional hearings as they choose. And then they have the responsibility of recommending a list of the most compelling projects after that review process. They will recommend a list of projects to town meeting. But only town meeting can approve actual CPA projects and appropriate the CPA funding for those projects to go forward. So every project must get that town meeting vote of approval in order to move forward. Again, so just to review that process, how do CPA projects happen? Project proponents in the community submit applications to the board, that Community Preservation Committee. Then that committee reviews the projects and gets input from the public and boards and committees in the community. It then recommends a list of projects to town meeting, and then projects are decided on by town meeting by majority vote. In some cases, it would be a 2/3 majority vote if the community wanted to bond against its CPA funds. But typically it's a majority vote to pass a CPA project. There are some requirements in terms of the CPA revenues that a town accrues over the course of the year through its CPA surcharge and also with the check that comes from the state. And so each year, 10% has to be set aside for 3 of the main programmatic areas of the program, either set aside or spent. So you either have to spend it on a project in those areas or set it aside in a reserve account that can only be used for those purposes. And those reserve accounts can accrue over year after year. They roll over year after year if you're saving up money for a big project in one of those areas. But then the remaining 65% is available for any of those projects in any of those programmatic areas. So if your community has a big town hall rehabilitation project or a big open space purchase that it wants to make, then you can kind of, as I said, accrue money in your funds and then apply the extra 65% that year for that large project. So it allows the community to really develop a flexible program to fill its needs year to year. The program, as I said, can be very flexible from year to year, and communities have found that that's very, very helpful to them as they go along year to year in looking at different project proposals. There is also an optional 5% of the revenues that can be used for the committee to administer the program locally, so there's no additional funds needed outside of the CPA program for that board to carry out its responsibilities. The program must, once it's adopted, must remain in place for at least 5 years, and that's so that the community has an opportunity to really try it out. But after 5 years, the act can be repealed at any time by the same method that it was adopted. It's not something that necessarily is set in stone. You can get out of it. One interesting statistic, though, is that there are no communities that have adopted CPA that have then revoked it. So we feel that that's really telling about the program, that most communities that do adopt CPA then find that they're finding that it is worthwhile for them. And then at any time after adoption, you can amend that surcharge up to if you've adopted, say, at 1% and you have a big project coming up and you want to raise your surcharge, you can raise it to 1.5%. Again, it's at the community's discretion. It would have to go through a town meeting vote and then a ballot election if you were going to raise or lower that surcharge percentage. And you can also change the exemptions that are operational anytime after adoption. So there is, again, more flexibility in the program to meet the community's needs. So if you were to adopt this program, what are some of the potential uses? What do we see communities using this program for? And I wanted to point out that all of the images in this presentation are of actual CPA projects around the state. So everything that you see is something that has been funded with CPA funds in a Massachusetts community. So these are the types of project in the historic preservation category that can be done. You can preserve historic resources, acquire them, restore and rehabilitate them, and adapt them for reuse. So we're talking buildings, structures, parks, vessels, landscapes, documents, and artifacts. And again, just to show you, some of the more popular categories of projects include historic municipal building rehabilitation. And so you can see images there. That's Gloucester City Hall in the upper left-hand corner. Below it is Sandwich Town Hall. And to lower right-hand corner, that's Stetson Hall in the town of Randolph. So we have seen many, many town hall projects go forward funded with CPA funds. And when we say rehabilitation, we mean all of the work to bring it up to current codes, these historic buildings, including wiring, plumbing, septic, ADA compliance. All of that type of work can be funded with CPA. And so this is, as I said, been a very popular category because you're getting that state match, state funding to help the community out with redoing these beautiful historic buildings, some of which, can be very expensive to rehabilitate. We also see a lot of adaptive reuse of historic buildings. So using a historic building that's no longer being used for what it was built for another use. And just as one example, on the lower left-hand side, the kind of yellowish building there is a library in Cohasset, which was no longer being used as a library, and so they developed some senior affordable housing in it. So again, it's kind of making use of what the community has available and developing it into something that's more useful to it in the current day. Another category of historic preservation project that's very popular is grants to nonprofit organizations in the community, like the Historical Society. Oftentimes your historical society may have historic buildings that it needs to keep up, and so they can apply for CPA funds. There has to be a public benefit to the project, so oftentimes a preservation restriction is granted to the town in exchange for that grant. So, and again, all these projects would have to pass town meeting, so nothing would go forward without that town meeting vote of yes. Another very popular historic type of project is preservation of historic town documents. And if you remember that image of the Declaration of Independence in Mendon, the lower left-hand corner picture there of the molding cover of the town documents there, that is how the documents were being stored in Mendon prior to them using some of their CPA funds to preserve and restore them, and also to develop better storage facilities for those really historic documents. So this has been, again, as I said, a very popular use of the funds. In terms of open space projects, CPA funds can be used for these types of projects. Land acquisition is one very common use of the funds, probably the most common, but we also see land creation, which can be buying an old gas station and maybe pulling it down to make a park or something like that. So we do see creation of land for open space or recreation as well. So again, just some images of actual projects around the state. Preserving agricultural land is a very popular use of the funds around the state. The upper right-hand corner image is in the city of Newton, and that was their last working farm that city chose to use its CPA funds to preserve it. There was a condo development that was going to go in there, and the town jumped at the opportunity to really keep that land in farming. And they have a very vibrant community-supported agriculture project, a nonprofit that is leasing the land, growing crops for their local farm markets, and they have educational programs for teenagers and so on and so forth. So it's become a very vibrant part of the community, and again, that's a common use of the funds. Protecting vulnerable land around the state, and maybe in your community. You might have land that's threatened by flooding or coastal lands. We see communities using it to protect it from flooding, and riverside land, and so on and so forth. Some of these lands have wetlands or wildlife habitat that's very valuable, and a community may decide to acquire it for protection of these vulnerable lands. Drinking water supply protection, again, is another very common use of the CPA funds. These are all drinking water supply protection projects in different communities. Top right corner is Cambridge. Bottom right corner is Sudbury, and then the left hand on the bottom image is in North Andover. So those are all communities that use CPA funds to protect their drinking water. In the area of active recreation, this is an area where we've seen some changes in the program. Originally, you couldn't use your CPA funds to rehabilitate your existing recreational facilities, and many communities made it clear to us that that was not working for them. They really wanted to be able to use their CPA funds to fix up their old playgrounds or athletic fields or whatever. So we worked with the state legislature, and we were able to get an amendment passed to CPA to allow communities to rehabilitate their existing recreational facilities. And so now we're seeing a backlog of those recreational projects going forward around the state. As I said, playgrounds, some of these are new, some of them are rehabilitated playgrounds, athletic fields. Hiking and biking trails is another very popular use. This one in particular is 3 images from a trail that was created around the city of Newburyport called the Clipper City Rail Trail. It's been very popular there. And parks. We see skateboard parks. We're seeing a lot more dog parks recently being created, little pocket parks. Sometimes the parks that have a historic value. This image on the top right-hand corner is a herring run park in the town of Weymouth, where they actually have a herring run, and you can go to that park and observe the run when the fish are running. And they have a lot of historic information there about that historic herring run. So again, many communities use it to kind of combine historic and recreation, or historic and housing mixed-use projects. Community gardens, again, are very popular use of the funds. And then finally, in the category of affordable housing, these are the types of projects that you can do. It's probably the broadest category because it has that support of affordable housing. You can do projects in support of affordable housing, and that includes developing plans, plans that will help you move forward on your affordable housing needs in your community. So this is, again, a very popular category of the CPA program. The housing that is developed by CPA funds can be dedicated or can be used by families and individuals earning up to 100% of the area-wide median income. And those figures there are the figures for different family sizes in Medfield currently. So you can see that in a lot of cases, this can be housing for local, teachers or firefighters, maybe municipal employees that otherwise might not be able to stay in that community. So it can be workforce housing, as well as the community can also target it to lower income if it wants, but it can be up to that 100% of area-wide median income. And I wanted to mention that it differs from the 40B program that you've probably heard about. 40B is another of the state's affordable housing development programs that communities often are not that happy with, because oftentimes the developer can kind of come to the community and say, okay, here's what I want to do. It's going to be a 40B project, so never mind your local zoning laws or your bylaws that apply to development. We're going to do it as a 40B, and this is what we're going to do. And the town doesn't really have too much control over that. That's not the way CPA-funded affordable housing works. With CPA-funded affordable housing, the community's really in the driver's seat. The community decides what kind of housing, all the local zoning laws and bylaws apply. And the housing must remain permanently affordable, and town meeting approval is required. So again, the community is really in the driver's seat with respect to this housing development, and nothing is going to get approved that town meeting does not feel is a compelling project for the community. So we're seeing in the area of affordable housing, we're seeing many communities supporting very actively housing for returning veterans. So these are 3 images. This is Dartmouth, Quincy, and Hingham, CPA-funded affordable housing developments in those communities for veterans. And oftentimes these housing for veterans are in conjunction with other services that the veterans need that can be provided to them. So again, that's a very common use of the housing funds. We see many communities, again, adapting historic mill buildings or other historic buildings in the community for use as affordable housing. The picture on the top right is of the Easton Shovel Shops. There's a large project that was done in that community where they turned those very historic shovel buildings that at one point were where 2/3 of all the shovels built in the entire world were built at that particular manufacturing site in Easton, town of Easton. And those shovels were used on the Transcontinental Railway here in the Civil War, so it had a lot of historic importance, not only to the community, but to the country as a whole. So that town really wanted to reuse those buildings, and you can see a picture on the lower right-hand corner of what one of those buildings looks like now. It's been, the mills have been, or those manufacturing buildings have been turned into affordable, and some market rate housing as well. So the CPA funds cannot go towards the market rate housing, but the development as a whole can have some market rate housing in it as well. Funded by other sources of funds, private funds or other funds. So that's how we see communities using their CPA affordable housing funds. Sometimes the funds are used to meet specialized community needs. This is in the town of Lexington, where they had a need for housing for brain injured adults. And so they rehabilitated this old historic print shop for housing for those adults. So again, your community might have some kind of specialized needs like that as well. And we often see communities partnering with organizations, nonprofit groups that develop affordable housing, like Habitat for Humanity, to do very small types of affordable housing projects, or projects where the family, like this one in the upper right-hand corner, actually provides some of the sweat equity in developing that affordable housing. So again, these are the types of projects that we see communities doing with CPA funds. Another thing that we see is that some communities choose to make this affordable housing if they're developing new affordable housing, like these buildings in Wayland and on the Vineyard, CPA-funded affordable housing that incorporates some really great energy-saving features like the solar panels, which will then make those houses continue to be affordable for the folks living in them going forward. They'll have lower utility bills and so on. So you probably want to know what are the costs and benefits of CPA in terms of your own community. So I wanted to just quickly walk you through how you would calculate for the average homeowner in Medfield if you were to implement a 1% CPA surcharge, and this is based on current tax data. How would you do that calculation to find out what that homeowner would owe? So you'd take the average assessed home value, in this case $595,000 and some. If you had the first $100,000 exemption for residential property value, you'd subtract that $100,000 and you'd get the net house value surcharged of $495,000 and some. Then you'd apply your municipal tax rate to that, and you get the amount subject to the CPA surcharge. In this case, it would be $7,950. Then you'd apply that 1% surcharge to it, and you come up with the $80 that this homeowner, this average priced home in Medfield, would owe $80 into the town's community preservation fund annually. So that's how you do the calculation. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the statewide CPA trust fund. This is the trust fund that has the funds that are used to provide the match that each community gets when they participate in the CPA program. The matching checks go out on November 15th each year, and they've gone out every single year that the program has been in existence, like clockwork. The funds come from $10 and $20 fees charged at the registries of deeds. So when you go and do business at the registries, you may pay a $10 or $20 fee anywhere in the state that will go into this statewide trust fund held by the Department of Revenue. And those funds will be used to match communities, what communities raise with the program. The past 2 years, we have, because the match rate has been going down with so many communities joining the CPA program and the housing market being depressed, those revenues from the $10 and $20 fees have been down. So the past couple of years, we've been successful in working with the legislature to get some additional supplemental funding for that community preservation trust fund. We were able to get $25 million from the budget surplus in fiscal year 2013, and last year, $11.4 million. So that was a big boon to the program, and it allowed the match rate to be increased the past 2 years. So again, the statewide CPA trust fund provides guaranteed annual disbursements to all CPA communities. It's administered by the Department of Revenue. All communities received a base match of 52% in 2013 and 31% last year. Next year, we do anticipate that the base match rate will go down to 18% in the fall of 2015 if we get no legislative action, if we cannot get the legislature to, again, provide some additional funds from the state budget surplus. So we are working very actively. As I said, I was up at the State House early this morning with a legislative briefing on the legislation that our legislative sponsors are, that we're working with, have filed House Bill 2587 and Senate Docket Bill 670, which has the House bill has 67 House sponsors, and the Senate bill has 21 sponsors in the Senate. So we do see support for the program on both sides of the aisle. And we have had a lot of legislative support for the program because just about every legislative district now has some CPA communities in it. And so the legislators can really see the benefit of the program when they go back to their communities. So again, looking at different surcharge levels that you could adopt, most communities are really only adopting at about 1% these since the economic downturn, so you might want to focus in on that line. So the average homeowner cost would be $80, and you would raise locally, we estimate about $260,000 on an annual basis, and that's just with your local CPA revenue. And then the state match would be in addition to that. If we're able to get some additional funding and push that 18% up to, say, 25%, which we're hoping to do, you'd get an additional $65,000, bringing your total revenue for the year to about $326,000. So, as I mentioned earlier, you can also bond against your anticipated CPA revenues. So that's also a very popular use of the CPA program for large projects. One final thing I wanted to mention, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions, is that CPA funds have been shown to be really, really good in terms of leveraging other funds to bring into the community to apply to your local projects. So statewide, we've seen more than $712 million leveraged by these funds locally. And so the funds, it's really true what they say, that money attracts other money. And so that the communities that have CPA have some funds at hand that they can use to apply for the local share of federal grants, state grants, different foundations, private donations, and so on and so forth. So this has been a very successful part of the program that I think was not necessarily anticipated by the legislature when they first passed CPA in 2000. So again, these are just some examples of how communities have leveraged their CPA funds to get additional funds coming in, flowing into the community. And these are just a few examples. We have many, many, many examples of this type of activity. So just to sum up, the overall benefits of participation is that it provides a steady source of funding for your local CPA needs. The CPA trust fund distributions, the check from the state, helps you to do these local projects. You can also use your CPA funds to leverage other state, federal, and private funding. Having the CPA program strengthens your community's financial outlook, again, partly because this additional flow of monies coming in. It creates local economic activity and jobs because you're going to be doing these projects, whether they be building houses or rehabilitating historic buildings, whatever, it's going to be providing jobs and local economic activity. And as I mentioned, since 2012, you can now use it in more ways. You can use it to rehabilitate your existing recreational fields and playgrounds and so forth. So if you want to check out our website, we have a lot more resources there on CPA and how to adopt it. So I'd encourage you to go check that out. And there's the web address right there and our phone number. If you call that number, you will get me. I answer the phone. So if you have any other questions that we don't get to tonight, give me a call and I'm happy to help out. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. Let me also just thank the warrant committee for coming up from their meeting. So maybe what we'll do is take questions maybe from the warrant committee first, so they can get back to their meetings if they have any, and then we'll come to the Board of the Selectmen, and then we'll take anyone that has a question at all. Any comments or questions from the warrant committee?
Mike Marcucci, how much of the money do you have to spend each year? Can you choose to spend none of it?
You can choose
Save
to
it?
spend none of it.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Thank you.
Yep.
Gus Murray, also on the Warrant Committee. If you set the state match aside and leave that out of the thought process, what is the advantage of a community adopting CPA versus just making a long-term commitment to generating that kind of money and doing things on their own?
I think it's to have that dedicated source of funds for those purposes. They're the types of projects that oftentimes it's just hard to get done otherwise. They may not get addressed. You might have a copy of the Declaration of Independence in your town files. I don't know, that's moldering down there. It may not. There are certain needs within the community. They tend to be kind of quality of life needs. Oftentimes, like the recreational needs, oftentimes you just can't fund those things out of your existing budget. So it expands the budget, it expands the pie to cover more types of projects. And then also, as I said, with some of these historic rehabilitation projects, I mean, we're talking about on historic buildings. What if you need a new roof on this building? This is a historic building. So it's if you need to fix the roof, maybe with ice dam damage or whatever we've had this winter, you can use the CPA funds for that rehabilitation or repair job and then get the state funds involved as well. So it lightens up, it expands your budget and lightens up your capital budget and allows you then to use those funds for other needs that the community has.
It's like an automatic stabilization fund going forward.
Martha Festa, I think I saw it up there, but I just want a clarification. So you can use this to partially fund a project, like if you had something either the town was ready to invest in, but maybe couldn't make the whole thing happen. You could just take a piece of it and put it towards a project?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Greg Sullivan, I'm on the Warrant Committee. Significant number of projects you show were, quote, historic projects. What's the definition of a historic project? Does it need to be on the National Register of Historic Places? Does it need to be mass historic?
That's a good question. It does not have to be on the National Register. It does not have to be on the state register. It can either be on the state register of historic places or something, a resource that is considered by the local historical commission to be significant to your community's history, culture, architecture, or archaeology. Okay, so the local historical commission actually can have a very big role in determining what is significant in your community.
Further, warrant committee members that have any questions at all? Okay, let me just turn maybe to the board. Pete or not?
Just a question, I think, and we had it with the prior meeting when we were first talking about this a little bit, is you're looking at a base match this year of 18% at the moment for minimum funding. Is there any difference on what you might get for a state match depending on whether you go 1%, 2%, or 3% of the surcharge? Do you get more credit? Other than the absolute dollar amount, does the state then kick in any more than a specific?
Yeah, that's a good
charge?
question. For communities that adopt at the full 3%, they actually are able to participate in kind of 2 extra distribution rounds each November 15th. Okay, so when the distribution happens, those 3% communities, there's a formula in the actual CPA statute that dictates that they can participate in these 2 extra rounds. And so they get a higher percentage. That's why we say base match.
Okay. So
because there are communities, and the formula in the statute actually favors some small, very resource-poor communities that are using CPA, so it behooves them to really adopt at 3%, and some of those communities are still getting a 100% match, and will continue to even as the match rate drops. So I think that Medfield would not be in that category because it tends to have a bigger tax base and higher population, but it would get additional funding from those 2 rounds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. On the higher side. So I'm sure income base is one of the things, I'm sure that's one of the criteria that they would probably look at too, as far as for extra credit, so to speak.
Well, you mean with the 3%?
Yeah.
It's population, and it's I think it's the size of the tax base.
Okay.
Yeah, it's within the language is actually within the statute. It's not the income, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, but I can provide that language for
Yeah, 'cause
you.
it'd
And
just be kind of
and we have
interesting
a good explanation of how it works on our website. I'd be happy
okay, so
to
we'll look
share
at
that with you.
Yeah, because usually what happens is we always get Medfield always gets the short end of the stick whenever it comes to extra credit, getting extra money, because there's always an excuse that the state has for not, helping us
Yeah,
out. Because
yeah.
either we're too rich, or the houses are too big, or blah, 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 blah.
We
Yeah.
did adopt at 3%, and we have gotten significant extra money in the
Okay,
2 rounds.
Yeah.
2 rounds, okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's
Yeah.
good.
And Pete?
So for me, the analysis is, it's sort of like a KISS analysis. I wouldn't consider doing this unless there was a state match. It's all about, for me, getting the state matching money. I regarded it as a savings, a tax that gets us savings by virtue of access to the state match. I also wouldn't do it unless I thought we were going to spend money in the 3 areas in the future in any event. I'm convinced that we will spend money in those 3 areas in the future, and so that I think it's imprudent of us not to adopt the CPA in order to get the state match. To me, it's all about the state match. You save money by getting the state match, and so that I would do the 3% because you get more money back from the
bang for
state.
your buck,
Even if
yeah.
it's only the 18% that we're going to get this year, it's more than we're getting from the state right now.
3%, you would get more than 18% anyway, even without them putting more money in,
Yeah,
because of those 2 additional rounds.
it's just another way around the edges that we can get money into our town that is not based on the property tax. And the state has created this mechanism. I would do it to get the state match, and only to get the state match. And I would get as much of the state match as I could.
I just had a couple of areas that are coming up in Medfield, and I just want to throw them out to see
Okay.
if they would be under that category.
Sure.
For example, the whole issue, we've just purchased about 127 acres of land of the former Medfield State Hospital. We are investigating now what we're going to do with that. What possible ways could you see that the Community Preservation Act could help us in that area?
Well, we actually see this type of thing all the time. It depends upon what you want to do with that property. If you want to develop some affordable housing on it, you could work with a developer. Some market rate housing, again, it could be a mixed income development of housing there. If there are historic buildings on this site that you wanted to repurpose for whatever reason, you could use your CPA funds for that. I mean, it's a very common type of a CPA project that we see. I mean, one example is the town of Canton, which is near where I live, adopted CPA not that long ago, and they have a big old industrial site with some very historic buildings that were to the site of Paul Revere's copper rolling mill. And so they're now working with the owner of the property. The owner is donating some of those really historic buildings to the town. They're developing, it's right along the Neponset River, so they're developing some open space and recreational components there. And then they're going to have some affordable housing and some market rate housing there. So again, it's the type of project that we see CPA kind of jumpstart with this type
So
of project.
If trails or
Trails could be developed,
recreational,
yep.
facilities went up there.
Absolutely. Any kind of outdoor recreational facility could be funded.
Medfield High School is looking, they're going to have to shortly replace their turf football lacrosse field. Would something like replacing a turf field fit into that?
You can't use CPA funds for acquiring the actual turf, okay? That was a change made in the law in 2012 when we broadened the allowable uses for outdoor recreational facilities. So that language was put in the bill. It was part of the legislative compromise. You go into the legislation or legislative process and you don't always come out with necessarily the whole thing that you want. You could, we haven't seen any guidance on the new language that was passed then. We're waiting for the Department of Revenue to issue some guidance on it. But we think that the community can do the work surrounding that, anything other than acquiring the actual turf and laying that down, but, any kind of irrigation or leveling or whatever, that type of work.
We
Yeah.
just did it in Medway as new fields, and there were 2 appropriations at town meeting, again with DOR's input. So there was a general appropriation for the specific turf, for the artificial turf. There was a separate appropriation from CPC funds or CPA funds for everything else.
Right.
Site work,
Right,
engineering.
right. So a lot of the cost could be funded with CPA, and then you could have the boosters or, find some other source of municipal funds for the actual purchase of the turf.
We only have about 5 more minutes on the questions here, so just quickly, with hiking trails, we have an awful lot of conservation land. We're looking to get the public to be able to use those land, things like hiking trails and conservation land.
Yeah. Mhm.
Would we have a pocket park, a straw hat park that's looking to be developed?
Yep.
That would,
Yep, the entire thing, yeah.
the town hall roof, which is 20 years old now? 17 years old, is going to have to probably be replaced shortly. Something like that on this building
Yep.
would be
Yep.
covered as well?
Yep.
Okay. Questions from anyone?
I guessed correctly when I was using the roof. Did you get ice damage as well?
No, it's just that.
Just wear and tear, yeah, long term, yeah.
Gil Rogers. You said in 2013 that it was 52%, and then it went to 30-some% in 2014. And then we're talking about, in your estimate here, 25%. Can you give us some assessment of if that's a downward trend that's going to continue? And on the other hand, what is the upside potential that that'll increase in the future?
That's a good question, and it's a tough one to answer. I mean, the matching rate has been going down. The year that 2 years ago, when we were able to get the $25 million from the state budget surplus added to the trust fund, that was what bumped it up to that 52% match. The previous, I think, 3 years, it had been around 25, 26%. And then last year, as I said, we were able to get some additional funding from the state's budget surplus, allowing it to go up to 31%. It's really hard to answer. We don't know. All I can say is that we're working very closely with the state legislature, and that the program is very popular around the state, and has a lot of support at the grassroots level, and a lot of support amongst those state legislators that we are working with. And I think I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to get some additional funding for the program. As I said, we have two components that we're looking at, a short-term component of an additional transfer of budget surplus funds, if there are any available this year. And then we've, working with our our chief legislative sponsor, who has filed a bill that would provide more of a long-term fix. And what that would involve would be an increase in those $10 and $20 fees at the registries of deeds. And so whether we can get that through the state legislature, I don't know. But as I said, the program is very, very popular. And so we'll see where we can get it.
Maybe time, maybe for like two questions. Bill, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question about the distinction between the CPA affordable and 40B. Are affordable units built under CPA, do they count under 40B?
You mean towards your 10% that is required? They do if they are 80% of the area-wide median income or below. Okay, so if you target the development of those housing to those levels, they can count on your SHI. Yep.
And CHAP has agreed with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Any other question? Mike, did you have one?
Yeah, is there any advance approval of projects required, and if so, how's that done?
You mean in terms of the state being involved?
No, in terms of whether it's eligible historic or eligible affordable housing or eligible historic preservation?
It's all determined locally. That's part of the work of the Community Preservation Committee, is to make sure that projects that are proposed are actually eligible. And in fact, we help communities with those questions all the time. Local town council also provides input on that, and the Department of Revenue. So, yeah.
The Commissioner of Revenue was actually given authority under the statute to promulgate regulations, but they have chosen not to do so. So unless and until they do so, it's a much more informal process.
It's informal and all done at the local level.
So honor systems. So
Honor system, yeah, yep.
Well, let me thank you very much for coming out. And the other
Thank
thing,
you.
if we work with our town moderator, if it's possible, would you be available to do sort of an abridged version of this and be available to answer some questions at our town meeting?
I'd have to check with our executive director, but I think that I could say most likely yes.
'Cause I think that was very informative
Yeah,
that
sure.
you did.
I'd be
Okay,
happy
well,
to.
thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for coming
Thank you
out.
very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Roberta Lynch, and you're watching Medfield.tv.